Well, welcome to another episode of Halfway There. This is episode number 55, and I'm so glad that you've decided to join us today. We have a great show for you today. This is going to stretch your understanding of prayer just a little bit, and I think it'll be good and certainly interesting if you haven't had that happen to you before in your prayer life. Before we get to that, though, I want to let you know you can find show notes and links to everything that we talk about here today at halfwaytherepodcast.com. That takes you directly to the archive of Halfway There, and you can check out every single episode, look through, see what sounds interesting, and give it a download. Thank you so much for doing that. You have lots of Christian choices for content to listen to, and you downloaded Halfway There. For that, I'm just deeply and profoundly grateful. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind, I want to encourage you to go out and leave a review of the show in iTunes, and or share it with a friend, or share this episode on social media. It just helps get the word out and lets other people discover the show and maybe find things that will help them find a spiritual breakthrough in their walk with God as well. Okay, thank you for doing that. Today's guest is a gentleman that I met through Twitter, which is starting to become a more and more common thing, meeting people through social media. His message really does intrigue me, and so we had a conversation, and I thought he'd be a great person to introduce you to. He's going to tell us all about how he discovered centering prayer. He'll describe the process, so I'm not going to do that now, but it is a different way of looking at prayer, of kind of meditating on a word instead of just talking about intercession. Now, I've thought for a long time that we need to go beyond just asking God for things. That's well and good, and we have to do that. We should do that. But also sometimes just sitting and being quiet and looking for new techniques to do that can be really valuable. And I think this story is evidence of that. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you to my friend, Rich Lewis.
I guess at a high level, it sounds like we're going to go back a little bit. Obviously, I'm Rich Lewis. I have a website that's about not even quite a year old, 3/4 of a year old, called Silence Teaches. And it's really devoted to centering prayer. But I've kind of let it evolve. But the main purpose is centering prayer, because I'm a centering prayer practitioner. So I have a weekly meditation that goes off my site. And then I also love to read, so I do book reviews. So after I've read books, I usually review them and put a post out. And then really whenever the Spirit moves me, if there's something I want to write about that I think others might want to hear, I will post that as well. So really my site is devoted to centering prayer. The weekly devotions are generally wrapped around centering prayer, silence, Jesus. And then the book reviews are many books on centering prayer, silence, Jesus, the Bible, Sabbath, those types of topics as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm interested to get into centering prayer because I know that that's definitely a different way of approaching it that most evangelicals have probably even heard of. And I'm kind of passionate about praying in different ways, so that'll be great. Take us back a little bit. Tell us about where'd you grow up?
Actually, I was born in New York City, but I don't remember. That was from 0 to 2. So I was born in New York City, and my father got a job, and it was in Pennsylvania. So we actually moved when I was 2 to Warminster, Pennsylvania, to a brand new development, brand new house. So I pretty much lived in Warminster, Pennsylvania from 2 until I went to college. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. So then I went west to University of Pittsburgh.
Okay. Well, what was your faith life like growing up?
My mother passed away when I was 3.5. So if she hadn't passed away, we probably would have been Catholic, because she was Catholic. Her mother and father, I think my grandfather was Catholic, but I know my grandmother definitely was Catholic. So we would have been Catholic, but unfortunately my mother passed away when we were 3.5. and we didn't continue with that at all. My dad remarried about 2 years later. We went to some Unitarian churches. I do remember that. Um, I remember liking it because I was young. I remember liking it because I liked the donuts that we got to have afterwards.
Always a
Um,
plus.
so, but otherwise, I didn't really have a religious up, upbringing on my own. I guess when I was in, I guess it would have been about high school, ninth grade or so. Some friends went to a Baptist based youth group. So I started going to a Thursday night Baptist youth group and really enjoyed it. It was a huge church, and there was probably, my God, 50 to 100 kids easily. We had fun. I mean, we learned about the Bible, and we had a lot of fun, and I made a lot of friends. So I kind of went to that while I was in high school. Um, and then when I went off to school in Pittsburgh, I went to some meetings with the campus Crusade for Christ, I believe was the group that I went to some of their weekly meetings. So I guess that was primarily my background. We weren't members of any church. Um, Went to a Unitarian church for a while and then stopped. So we didn't really go to a church on a regular basis or part of a church.
Gotcha. So, would you say you had faith or you didn't? Like or were you just kind of it was part of your life but not a central part?
Um, I mean, I had faith. I always believed in God. I never didn't believe in God. And in high school, I definitely, with being in the Baptist-based youth group, um, definitely did believe in God. And probably in high school, that's really when I started reading the Bible. I really hadn't even picked up the Bible and taken a look at it. So in high school, I actually remember reading the New Testament for the first time. And then obviously since then I've probably read it a couple more times and then even tried to get through the Old Testament as well.
Oh yeah, that's always fun. Although it's interesting sometimes to find some of God's heart in the prophets. I always find that interesting.
Right, or even the Psalms.
Oh
I
yeah.
kind of enjoyed the Psalms. Quite frankly, were kind of fun to read through.
Yeah.
And I guess Genesis is fun. Genesis is fun and interesting. Some of the other books where there's a lot of laws and regulations, it was tough reading. And then Psalms was kind of nice reading as well, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Cool. Well, how did you come to Christ? Are you kind of alluded to it maybe there, but did you ever have like a moment or did you decide to give your life to Christ at a certain point?
I think I pretty much did it in high school. It probably was on a Thursday night when I was at the group because they would do that every Thursday. The Baptist based group did that every
Yeah.
Thursday night, and they would talk and they would invite people to invite Christ into their hearts. So I'm fairly certain I had to do it then because I don't think the Unitarian Church had a call, so to
No.
speak, at any of their meetings, and so it had to be at one of the Thursday night meetings that I went to.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. So but it sounds like you know, and I'm not fishing for anything here, just so you
Sure.
know, like as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be a moment, which I actually find way more interesting because I grew up in a more in that kind of Baptist tradition where it was like, hey, you've got to have, you got to have that moment, right? You got to have that time when and I'm not all that convinced anymore. I think that what's important is that you love the Lord and you have a relationship with Him,
I mean,
and
I
that
think
comes out.
yeah, I mean, I think I always did, to be honest with you. I just didn't have the church experience or the experience of a group of people formalizing the process, so to speak. I mean, I
Right.
always believed in God. I always prayed to God. I did, and was always thinking, what is this God, and how do I pray to Him or her, and how do I relate to Him or her? I think that obviously when I started going to the youth group in high school, it was more, I guess, formalized, and they talked about bringing Christ into your heart, and I certainly did, and I began then reading the Bible and wanting to learn more about the Bible and God
Yeah.
and Jesus, and what does the New Testament have to say, and how should I read it, and how should I live my life based upon that?
Yeah. Well, take us through some of those formational years. What were some of the events or stories that you have about how you learned about God?
Um, I mean, I guess back then it was mostly just reading the Bible and understanding who is this Jesus? Where was he born? Who is he? What is he all about? Why did people follow him? Um, were some of my main interests. Um, Quite frankly, I mean, I guess I would say if I compare now to then, God is a much different. Well, God hasn't changed. What I think about God
Yeah.
has definitely changed. I mean, I wish, and maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but I almost wish I had. I, I was always interested in silence. I always wished I had a container for the silence. What do you do in the silence? Or I wish that I had been introduced to centering prayer or some type of silent prayer, 25 to 30 years ago. I mean, I'm
Right.
pleased, very happy that I have it now. And it's a very important part of my life for the last almost 3 years, quite frankly. Um, but I think silent prayer, specifically centering prayer, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it and how you do it,
Yeah.
um, has meant all the world to me. I mean, it doesn't replace prayer, talking to God and singing and reading the Bible, but it complements it. But it's really deepened my faith, and it's deepened what I think about God and how I relate to God and how I live every day.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to hear all about that. I wonder, so when you were like you mentioned reading the Bible was a big thing, which is obviously good. I've got a degree in biblical studies. Obviously I care about that. Um but I'm curious, what were your ways of knowing God then that you look at now, and maybe you just covered this. If you did, just say so. But that you look back and go, oh, I can see where that was good at the time, but maybe it could have been richer if we had some different kinds of things. I just want to give our audience kind of a idea of what that was like.
Sure. No, I guess in high school and even throughout college, and in my 20s and 30s, God was outside of me. God was looking down at me. God maybe almost was a deity. I don't think
Yeah.
God was. I don't think God was angry, but God was definitely more outside of me, somewhere else, looking down at me, but would listen to me, and I could talk to him or her. Whereas now, with my silent prayer practice, I mean, I think obviously God is wherever God wants to be, quite frankly, but God is in me. God is very much within me and my kind of constant companion and partner. I kind of view it as I sit with Jesus during my silent prayer, and then I get up and I walk with Jesus during my non-silent parts of the day, whatever that is, whether it's at work or with my family or with friends or wherever I am, is kind of how I view it. Jesus is a constant presence, a silent presence when I sit in silence during centering prayer, and then a walking partner with me during my non-silent parts of the day, as I call it.
Yeah.
But God is very much in me. That the biggest difference when I was younger is God was kind of looking down at me, and maybe in the beginning more in judgment, and then less in judgment. But now definitely God is in me, and kind of my actions spring from God
Right.
within me. So
Yeah.
it's
Well, what's interesting about that is your perception of who God is, right? That God is
right.
outside of you, that God is not maybe not for you. You could even say like he's sort of judging you, trying to get you to maybe act a certain way, which is, you know, um definitely that was part of my experience. So I get all that.
Yeah, I probably was a little bit scared of God, and then I get less and less scared of God, and realize that God probably loves me no matter what. I mean, now I definitely believe it. But back then, I probably wasn't sure, so I might apologize more often, or hope that I didn't do something that God would be angry at me for. Whereas now, I think God is thrilled to have me as His son or child,
Yeah.
and God really is not angry at me. God loves me, and God constantly loves me. Is really the biggest difference, I would say. with
Yeah.
now compared to 25 years ago. I think God loves me no matter what. God loves when I sit in silence with him. God loves when I pray verbally with him or her. God, if I forget to pray, God's okay with that, and God's thrilled to wait for me the next time I sit and pray verbally or silently with God.
Well, how long did that initial, or how long did that your view of God in the previous way last?
Um, I'm gonna say probably almost up until 3 years ago, when I,
Mhm.
really started practicing silent prayer. And for whatever reason, June 1st, 2014, I don't know what was important about that date, but I decided I wasn't going to experiment anymore. I had learned about centering prayer when I read Amos Smith's book, Healing the Divide. He mentioned silence. He talked a lot about centering prayer. He talked a lot about the Jesus paradox. And what he meant by that was that Jesus is at once God and human, and that we also are, we're not God, but we have divinity in us. And obviously, we're very much human. So, like Jesus, we could say we're a paradox too. We're human and we're divine, but he would say with a little d. We're not God with the
Mm.
big, the big D.
Yeah.
So I would say kind of the change in all this started really with reading his book, Healing the Divide, realizing I just found a container for silence that I've been looking for my whole life through the practice of centering prayer, and that changed the whole way I pray and the whole way I look at God. It I guess I'd never sat with God before silently. It was
Mhm.
all praying to God as if he was above me looking at me instead of just sitting with God. And that just changed. Silence changes you. Sitting quietly with God on a daily basis. I practice centering prayer twice a day for the most part, sometimes three, but sitting in silence with God for 20 minutes each time, day after day, year after year, changes you, quite frankly.
Yeah, it does. I can say that from my own experience too. Some of those times when I've been able to get away and just be quiet are some of the most transformational. Um, so I don't
And I
know.
think it's God changing me too. I don't
Yeah.
think it's not transcendental meditation. I don't even know what that is, quite frankly, other than I know the name of the term.
Right.
I strongly believe that I'm sitting with Jesus, and Jesus is acting within me, deep within me, in the silence, in ways that I don't know, that come out of me and my actions during the day, quite frankly. So I strongly believe I'm not just meditating. I'm sitting with God, and God is acting deep, deep inside of me. And then whatever fruits of God's wisdom and knowledge and what He's providing for me are coming out in my actions and in the world when I'm in my non-silent parts of the day.
Right. I really want to hear a little more about kind of how you came to this. Like you read the book by Amos Smith, but what was it in you that led you to that? I mean, was there any we haven't really covered any of your life from high school to say that period. So you said 25 years later. Like what was there? What was that experience? What was your experience with God like during that period of time that would kind of lead you or open you to this to I guess contemplative prayer or centering prayer?
Um, I guess these are great questions. You almost have to kind of take. It's kind of hard to self-evaluate yourself. So when I
Sure.
graduated from school, I moved back home. At that point, my parents were living in Newtown, Pennsylvania. I moved back home, began working, and stayed at home for a while. And they were part of the United Church of Christ, so they asked me to go with them. So I actually then I ended up going to the United Church of Christ. I ended up helping out with the youth group. I got to know the pastor pretty well. She was at that point maybe 5 to 8 years older than me, so we were kind of the same age. And she needed someone to help with the youth group, so she grabbed me, and I started doing the youth group at the United Church of Christ. And then I joined the church. So probably what formed me was just going to the church every week, listening to her really wonderful sermons, There was a lot of young people in their 20s and 30s, so I ended up joining a group. We did a lot of Bible studies on Revelation, on John, and on different books of the Bible, and then we did a lot of fun things together. And we always, prayed for each other. So I think I began really exploring the Bible and God a lot more than I had
Hmm.
uh, when I was younger, just because I kept going to church every week, hearing wonderful sermons, and I was part of different groups, and we studied different books in the Bible, and we prayed a lot as part of the church service. You're praying for one another, so it just kind of changes changes you, and you just begin naturally exploring prayer and naturally exploring the Bible more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Um, so were you the youth pastor there?
Um,
Would you say that, or you were just like a youth leader?
I
I
was
don't,
a
I
youth
don't,
leader, so I wasn't a
I don't mean to be diminutive about
no, no, no,
that.
no,
I
no,
just
no.
was trying to define.
But no, I was a youth leader, so I helped, and actually, I always my wife did it with me for a while. I had a best friend who also led the group with me, and then another friend also did. So it was always two of us were always kind of leading the youth group
Gotcha.
at this church.
Cool. Very cool.
And it was a lot of fun just to interact with. They were mainly junior high and high school. It was a small church, so we maybe had anywhere from 5 to 10 at the most, which actually is fine too. And we would, have little lessons that we would do, or we would do games, or we might even in the summer just go to the beach for the day and have fun. But it was fun.
Yeah.
It was a kind of fun experience.
Cool. Well, did you ever have a time when God felt distant or far away, or seemed like he was not close?
Um, I would say, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but I would say when I, I had to leave work to be a stay-at-home dad for personal reasons in our family to take care of someone. So I was a stay-at-home dad to help care for someone for 2.5 years. That was back in 2009 to 2011. And then I became, as a result of that, kind of depressed because work doesn't define who you are, but almost
Hmm.
sometimes maybe it can. So here I was not getting up, not going to work every day. And in the beginning, it was great. And then all of a sudden, it became not great. And I began questioning, who am I? What is my purpose? What am I really doing? And then I kind of began pulling back from God. And did get angry at God, quite frankly.
Hmm.
And I stopped reading the Bible, stopped praying, stopped going to church. I was still, at the United Church of Christ at the time. Stopped going to the church, um,
What
and
were you angry
it was
about?
pretty good.
Was it with the
I,
situation with the family member, or
I
was
think
it
I guess I was just angry that the situation had happened, and that I wasn't working, and it was a hard time. And I guess I don't, just to protect the privacy of the person.
sure?
It was a hard time, and it was upsetting. What the person's better now, but it was upsetting at the time that the person was going through that ordeal. So it was just a tough situation. It was tough to watch the person suffer, and it was tough to be. So I think all around, I was just upset that the person wasn't doing well. I was upset that I wasn't working, and then I just began wondering, who am I? What am I? What am I really? I mean, in hindsight, I mean, I'm now back at work, but I look back and I think it was the best thing in the world that could have happened to me, quite frankly, because now I'm a much different person because of that whole situation. I'm stronger in my faith of God, and I trust God a,
Mm.
a whole lot more. And I don't. I think I worried too much about money at the time, and will we have enough money to live? Will we have enough money to retire? Well, my priorities were backwards, quite frankly. So, as much as I don't ever want to go through kind of the situation we went through again, through, I'm a better person because of it, and I'm closer to God and have more faith in God as a result of that situation, and realize that I'm not what I'm a child of God, and that's really
Mm.
what I am. I'm not a worker. I'm not an employee at a company. I'm a child of God.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had to go through that period of doubt and anger in order to get to this place of understanding yourself as a child of God, not all those other things. Would you say that?
Definitely. No, yeah, I would definitely so. My wife from time to time talk about it and say, we're both better because of the situation.
Hmm.
We don't want to go through it again, but we're both better people because of it. In fact, we were talking a day or two ago, and my wife said, I'm a different person because of it. I'm calmer. I'm more confident. I'm closer to God.
Yeah.
I trust God more.
Oh,
Ironically, my wife was actually a rock through the whole thing. My wife always trusted God and said, God will provide and we'll get through this. I didn't then. Now I do, but I didn't then, but she always did.
yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's true that you sometimes we have to go through those moments and see God provide through them in order to trust him. Like that's one way that we learn that. Um
Right.
yeah, so interesting. I'm curious, was there any kind of like how did you come out of that? Was it just gradual? Sometimes it is, and sometimes people have a kind of a turning point or a decision point. I was wondering what happened for you.
Well, to be honest with you, we needed we needed me back. We needed Rich back in the workforce. We needed the money.
Yeah.
So my wife pretty much said, if we want to stay in our home, you need to get back to work. It's not you're home, and we were helping the situation, but now we actually need your finances again. You need to get back to work. So I had I had to take action, and fortunately, I actually was able to contact my previous employer and interviewed and went right back into the company in October of 2011. It was so. I guess the impetus was we really didn't have a choice. If I didn't work, we were going to have some really, really serious
Gotcha.
financial situations to pay our bills, to eat, and provide for our children. She needed my income.
Yeah.
So I needed to start working again. And then once I started working again, I started feeling better about myself. I didn't define myself as my work, but I guess I started feeling better about myself. And then I actually started going to church again at the United Church of Christ. I'm not there now. I'm in between churches, but I actually then started going again to the United Church of Christ, got involved, um, and began doing different things there. I guess I taught. I think what did I do? I taught. I was the adult faith formation teacher
Hmm.
at the church, and I was membership too. So I chaired membership. So as new people wanted to come in, I helped with onboarding them into the church, introducing to the church, and welcoming them. And I also taught on Sundays.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. So that was helpful. Thank you. Because am confident that your experience going through that sort of dark season must have opened you up or changed your awareness of who God is and who yourself was to lead you into the centering prayer journey that you've been on in the last couple of years. Um, so tell us about that. Like, how did you find? You said you read the Healing the Divide by Amos Smith, but how? Like, why were you looking for that book, or where? How did that come into your life, and how did it really um, shape your understanding of prayer?
I guess I always liked silence, and I'm an introvert, so I guess I'm a quiet type of person to begin with.
Uh huh.
But I guess I first Carl McColman. Um, I'm trying to. He wrote the big book of Christian mysticism. I hope I'm getting the title correct. Um, in that book, and he had another book which the name's escaping me, but he talks a lot about silence and silent prayer. Um, Not specifically centering prayer, but really just talked a lot about silence, and that kind of got me intrigued. And I used to, and that probably was in 2012, 2013. I came across him probably just cruising on Amazon, and that got me interested in Christian mysticism.
Hmm.
But he didn't really talk about, Christian meditation, or he didn't talk about centering prayer. He just kind of talked about silence and the power of silence and Christian mysticism. And that just got me intrigued. So I
Which
would just
can you define Christian mysticism?
um
I mean, it doesn't have to be a
I think
technical
I don't
definition.
I actually, you could probably ask numerous people, and they're all going to say different
True.
things. I think I've heard it simply explained as a mystic is someone who simply loves God and wants to have a loving experience with God. it,
Yeah.
it could really be as simple as that. I don't think we need to overcomplicate what is mysticism. It's just kind of a loving relationship with God, someone that loves God and lets God love you back is a
Right.
mystic, as
But
far as as
yeah,
far as I'm concerned.
so the reason I ask is because I think, a traditional evangelical audience is going to be a little bit afraid of the term mysticism, whether
Right.
they know it or not. So, you know, being a mystic sounds to me, before some of my experiences, like being out in the desert, like the Desert Fathers, right? Being out in the desert with a robe and a bunch of sand, right? And
Right.
and silence, right? Uh, and so, oh, those people are mystics, or they're whatever. Or they're maybe a little bit kind of people who are weird, or yeah, I don't want, that's not the right word. You know what I mean? But like kind of flaky,
Well,
maybe even is sometimes I think the way that it's perceived, and I don't think that's true, as opposed to like a solid, what we might consider like a rational theological kind of a faith.
I think it scares people. They think it's new agey. They think
Yes.
it's not biblical. It's heretical. It's of the devil. And I've had people say what I do is not proper, is not biblical. Um, but I don't completely agree. I mean, there's many. We don't know exactly how Jesus prayed, but we know that Jesus went off and quietly prayed. We know that Jesus prayed all night at
Mhm.
times. So we don't know exactly. I don't think we know exactly what Jesus did,
Yeah.
but he was by himself, and I'm only imagining that he was talking to God. I'm also imagining that he was just quietly sitting with God, and I guess the Bible teaches us how to pray, and some of the ways to pray is that you're not really supposed to say tons of words. It's not
Hmm.
necessary. So, in my opinion, that could be silent prayer. God doesn't need a lot of words, and silent prayer is exactly that. It's not a lot of words, but I think it scares people. They don't know. They think it's new agey, and it's not. It's not meditation. It's not new agey. It's just a different way, in my opinion, a different wonderful way to pray, where you're sitting quietly with God. And I verbally pray too. Actually, after my centering prayer, I pray with a prayer rope. And I don't know if you're familiar with a prayer rope, but they kind of have knots. It's kind of I think mine is a hundred knots on it, and it has a cross at the one end. And I will pray the Jesus prayer. Jesus, Son of God, I shorten it. I don't say Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I say Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on. I'll say my name. I'll say my wife's name. I'll say my son's name. I'll say a friend's name. I'll say someone that I think needs prayer. So that kind of, I complement my centering prayer often with my prayer rope, and on each knot, I pray a different person's name, and sometimes I even walk when I do that. There's something nice about
Mm.
silently sitting with the centering prayer, and I want to talk a little about how you do centering prayer, because people
Yes.
probably aren't familiar with it. But after my centering prayer, I kind of, my routine is I use my prayer rope, and maybe on your website you can show a picture of a prayer rope so people can understand what I'm even talking about. And I verbally do my Jesus prayer, my shortened version of the Jesus prayer, and pray for a different person or a different situation. And then I might read a book or read a few verses of the Bible, Lectio Divina style.
Hmm.
And then I get up, and maybe on your site you can explain what that is for people, because that's kind of a meditation type of prayer.
Yeah.
And then I get up and then continue my day. So I guess my centering prayer is not, it's silent prayer complemented with a prayer rope, where I'm talking out loud and often maybe walking in a circle or something, and then reading a short passage in a book, and then getting on with my day. And I often do that during both, sessions of my centering prayer each day.
Yeah. Well, take us into that practice of centering prayer. So you described this whole process, but the silent part you said you wanted to talk about. So take us through
Sure.
that. I'd love to hear that.
So centering prayer itself, I guess, goes back to the early 70s. Um, Actually, William Menninger found kind of stumbled into it in the Cloud of Unknowing, which is I guess a old English book. I don't know if it's the 12th century, if I might have my dates wrong, but he stumbled across the Cloud of Unknowing and reading this Cloud of Unknowing, and then kind of discovering a silent prayer method, which then became centering prayer. And it was then further refined by Thomas Keating, William Menninger, and Basil Pennington. And the three of them are Trappist monks. And actually, I actually met William Menninger. I was at a retreat last October in Frenchville, Pennsylvania, and he led a weekend retreat about the Cloud of Unknowing and St. John of the Cross. And of course, we had
Mm.
centering prayer. So he was, I guess you could call it, the founder of centering prayer. And then it was further refined by those three gentlemen, the three Trappist monks. And that the method itself, is very simple, but not simple, because silence is brutal when you try to when I first tried to sit in silence, actually pre centering prayer, when I didn't know centering prayer, I would sit in silence and I would set a timer for a minute, and it was brutal.
Yeah.
And then I would do it for 2 minutes and 3 minutes and try to go longer each time, but it was really, really hard.
I'm kind of
Uh,
laughing because I can relate to that. I mean, I told you before about there's a Jesuit retreat house here in Sedalia, Colorado called the Sacred Heart Jesuit
okay.
Retreat House, and one of my favorite places on earth. It's beautiful. They've got like 200 acres. Go there in the summertime. You can walk around. It's great. But it, trying the first time I showed up there, I got there kind of late after work. I got off work at like 8 o'clock. It's like 8:30. I get there. Nobody greets me. There's nobody around, right? Because it's silent and
Right.
they're all in their little rooms. And I was like, I don't know what to do. It took me like 45 minutes to find my room, which is right around the
Right.
corner. And the first, I'm just like, okay, I don't quite know what to do with all this silence. So yeah, silence can be. We're not used to it in a world where we can be entertained every second of the day by our phones or a screen of some type. Silence is really difficult.
No, it is hard. So the practice itself is simple, and it's really four steps. It's you sit, you just a comfortable chair or couch or whatever, but the object is not to fall asleep. But if you fall asleep, that's okay, because and God loves you and you needed to sleep, quite frankly. But the first step is sit comfortably, kind of with your back straight. And then the step two is you're going to think of a word, and there's different ways you can do it, but maybe the easiest way to do it is to start with a word. So you think of a word that you're going to use. Could be love, Jesus, beach, water, whatever your word is. Probably no more than a 2 or 3 syllable word. So then you're sitting. Generally, you close your eyes, but you don't have to. Some people do it with their eyes open. But you sit, you close your eyes as you begin thinking thoughts, and that means anything from you're angry at a situation that happened, or you're thinking in the future, what am I going to have to dinner for dinner tonight, or you're thinking about what am I going to do this weekend. As you begin to have a thought like that, whatever that thought is, interiorly in your mind, not out loud, you come back to that word. It's really considered what's called a sacred word. So you're sitting, your eyes are closed. Whenever you have a thought, whatever that thought is or emotion, you re-center yourself with that sacred word that you chose. And you should use the same word through the whole session, otherwise you'll confuse yourself.
Hmm.
So if the word's love, and you begin thinking about what am I going to have for dinner tonight, interiorly you think about the word love, but then you let go of that too. And really, every time you're planning the day or whatever it is, you keep bringing that word love interiorly back to your mind. And that's really all you keep doing during the entire quiet time. And I guess you can center as long as you want. I mean, I practice generally 20 minutes of silence, but whatever you're comfortable with, quite frankly. If it's 5 minutes, if it's 10 minutes, if in the beginning, if you're a beginner and you can't stand doing it for too long, maybe it's 2 or 3 minutes. But you're sitting in, and you can. I use an application. The Contemplative Outreach is an organization which these three Trappist monks were really formed, or Thomas Keating created the organization. So they have an application that I use that has a timer on it. So there's an opening bell and a closing bell, and I can set the timer for whatever time that I'm doing my centering prayer.
What's the
So
name of that app? Do you have that?
it's just Contemplative Outreach,
Okay, that's the all right.
and it's on iTunes.
Yeah.
So you could share that with your audience on your site as well, that they can get it on iTunes. The name, it's actually very nice. You can select an opening prayer, you can select the opening sounds, and then the closing sounds after the time period, and you select your time period that you want to have. So that way you know when you're starting and you know when you're ending, and then there's a closing prayer on there if you want to select one as well. But
Okay.
essentially, it's really as simple as that. You're sitting. Whenever your mind is wandering, interiorly, you're bringing yourself back with that sacred word. And then when the time period is done, you can kind of sit for however long you want, 1 minute, 30 seconds, and transition on with your day. And I talked a little bit about that, what I've kind of evolved into, and it'll probably change over time. But what I do now is, the prayer rope, and then some reading, and then I get up and continue with my day. But everybody will find what works for them. But what you'll find, or what I have found, because I've been doing it now for almost 3 years, is less and less I have to use that sacred word to bring myself back. I know I didn't sleep. I don't know where I went, but I'm literally in the spaces between my thoughts,
Hmm.
because all of a sudden the bell rings, 20 minutes has passed, and I don't know where I was other than resting with God. And you go deep. You can go deep, and God. I strongly believe God is deep, deep inside of us. Beyond our thoughts, beyond our emotions, acting, at a deep, deep level within us, filling us. And it's not filling us because He's already there, but filling us with so much love
Hmm.
that we just don't realize.
Yeah. So tell us some of the benefits in your life, or some of the results that you see in your life from practicing centering prayer.
Um, a lot of fruits, and you don't. I mean, I guess I don't go into it praying for fruits.
Sure.
I go into it because I love God and I want to sit with Jesus, quite frankly. But yes, what I definitely noticed over the last couple years is I'm a much calmer person in life, I'm still human and I'm still work in progress, as I call it. But I might not get angry. If I get angry, I might stop myself a lot quicker than I would have 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm a much calmer person. I'm kind of full of excitement for
Mm.
life and living life. Sometimes I guess I'm amazed because I'll do it. Like, I'll wake up for in the morning. I wake up, and often, because that's just my nature, I'm worried and thinking about, oh my God, what do I got to do today? What do I got to get done? I do my centering prayer, and I'm calm and I'm peaceful and I'm energized and I'm excited and I can't wait for the day. And I can't explain it other than that's what happens after you sit with God. And then the same thing in the middle of the day. And people at work know it. I get up, I leave my desk. They know where I'm going. They joke and say I'm going down meditation lane in the parking lots of my car. But I sit in my car, and it might be at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So no matter how busy I am at work, I try to do another centering prayer session for 15 or 20 minutes. And I'm always amazed by, when I go back to work, how productive I am, how much I get done, kind of solutions to things that I didn't know how I was going to do arrive. So I don't know how to explain it other than it's amazing. It's just God partnering with me in the morning, getting me through the day. And then I'm sitting with God again, and then God's helping me finish the rest of the day. So God is kind of my constant companion and constant partner
Uh,
in life.
yeah, I love that. And because I was just thinking, it sounds like you are actually walking with God every moment of your day.
I am. I mean, I'm sitting with God, and then I get up and I walk with God after centering prayer, and that's all. I just keep doing that. I keep repeating: sit with God, walk with God, sit with God, walk with God. And I just think, and I don't think, and silence is not everyone can. Like my wife will not do centering prayer just because she's not interested. I have a 15-year-old daughter. She will do a 5-minute sit with me, and my son, believe it or not, who's 9, also will. Now they both want individual attention from dad, so the three of us. So dad sometimes ends up doing 3 sessions a night. But they wanted to know what because I would go in the basement at night, and they wanted to know where am I going, what am I doing, and I would tell them I'm doing centering prayer. What is it? Why don't you come down? Nah, we're not interested. And then all of a sudden, my daughter said, "Well, let me come down. What is this? Show me what you're doing." And I taught her centering prayer, and she does it with her eyes open. I do it with my eyes closed. She said I'll fall asleep, and I said that's fine if you do it with your eyes open. You can kind of stare at a spot in front of you, but I explained to her again, you stare at pick an object, stare at it, but don't daydream. She likes to write. Don't think about how to develop your characters in the little short stories that you're writing. Now's the time to sit with God, not to daydream. So she does it with her eyes open. My 9-year-old son, then he wanted to join me. So we have a little different route. Well, and I guess with my daughter, we talk afterwards too. So she likes to spend some time with me. Now my 9-year-old son wanted to learn more. What am I doing in the basement? But he doesn't want to do it with his 15-year-old daughter. He has a 15-year-old sister. He wants to be just with dad. So
Yeah.
when I do it with him, we light a candle, which is kind of fun. We together light a candle, and then I open up the application and we read the prayer. And the opening prayer is, "Open my heart to your love." So he will read that, and he understands we're opening our heart to God's love. And then we set the timer together for 1 minute. And then we actually sit together, and I put my arm around him. Sometimes he puts his head on my chest, and we silently sit for 1 minute. Now I'll admit I love it, and he's a cute little guy. I'll open my eyes and I watch him because it's so cute to see him, a little 9-year-old, sitting there very quiet, not moving, with his eyes closed. It's just fantastic. So I'll watch him. Then the bell will go off, and then he'll blow the candle out, and we'll go back upstairs.
Yeah. That's probably the only minute of his day he's still, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But now my 20-year-old, once he tried it once, and then he's no longer interested. But he did actually try it with me once.
Yeah, cool. Very
So
cool.
it's not for everyone, but I think a contemplative practice in general is good.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Rich, how can people connect with you if they want to?
Sure, they can reach me at my site, and it's very simple: silenceteaches.com. I have a contact form. They can ask me any questions. I have a free ebook on centering prayer on my website. So for those that are not familiar with centering prayer, they can get it for free, and it'll be emailed directly to their email, and it'll at a high level talk about centering prayer. Um, I guess there's a bunch of different. It kind of begins with the question and answers the question. So it's about a 10-page, simple to read ebook that answers, I believe, about 10 questions around centering prayer that I
Cool.
think can help. That I think can help people, for
Great.
those that are interested.
Yeah, that's great. I will link up to that in the show notes, which people can find at halfwaytherepodcast.com. And anything else you want to leave us with?
Um, no, other than I thank you for this, and I hope that people don't get scared of silent prayer. I hope that they realize that it's something that can complement their other forms of prayer, and that it's something that I think practiced daily, monthly, yearly can really transform you. Just from my experience and from other people that I know that are long-term practitioners, sitting with God quietly changes you, and it's wonderful. And I highly encourage others to try it.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Rich, for sharing your story with us. I definitely appreciate everything that you've learned about centering prayer and the way that you just shared with us a little bit about how to do that. Guys, you can connect with Rich at silenceteaches.com. That's his website, or on Twitter. I've got links to that in the show notes at halfwaytherepodcast.com. I hope, if nothing else, that this episode just helped you connect a little bit to the idea that prayer is more than simply asking God for things, and that maybe there's other ways to approach it that are actually beneficial to you and to your heart as you try to connect with God. Definitely let me know if you connect with Rich and if you enjoyed his story. Next time on Halfway There, we'll speak with a woman whose faith was challenged by the purity culture, and how we find out how she got it back. We'll see you next time, friends. Keep the faith.